rather than thinking about the stomach pains and sweaty palms as a sign that you can't do it, instead you think to yourself, my body is doing exactly what it should be doing.
We're sort of talking about the problem with ourselves silently and not actually working towards solutions, even though we might think we are. We're more going over it and over it and over it again without it's like the hamster wheel.
When we're experiencing chatter, we're often highly motivated to talk about it with other people. The problem is we often find someone to talk to and then we keep on talking about it over and over and over again. And that can have the unintentional consequence of pushing away people who genuinely care about us.
This is episode 248. Well, if the most important words in the world are the ones we say to ourselves, then my guest today works in a truly critical arena. He is one of the world's leading experts on controlling the conscious mind. How's that for intimidating? And he really studies how the conversations that people have with themselves impact their health, their performance, their decisions, and their relationships. Dr. Ethan Kross is an award-winning professor at the University of Michigan and also the best-selling author of national bestseller Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. I got to sit down with Ethan this week and have a discussion with him about his book, Chatter, and all of the insights that he shares in it. So we are going to do really a short course for you in today's episode on what is this voice in our head? Why is it talking to us all the time? What are the implications of that, of really never being able to get it to turn off? And what are our tendencies as it relates to managing chatter? And what might be tools that are perhaps even more impactful? So all of this work around chatter was born out of Ethan's lab at the University of Michigan. It's called the Emotion and Self-Control Lab. And this is really his area of expertise. Ethan attended the University of Pennsylvania and then got his PhD in psychology from Columbia and then did a postdoc fellowship in social affective neuroscience. And really his interest was what are the neural systems that support self-control? So the research that they're doing in his lab has been widely published. It's been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, Time Magazine, and others. He's been interviewed absolutely everywhere and has participated in policy discussions at the White House. Ethan today lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan with his wife and his two daughters, so we got to bond a bit over our mutual love for Zingerman's Deli before we went live in this episode. And then I'm just so grateful for his approachability and his generosity with these really big ideas. Chatter is what he refers to as the dark side of our inner voice. And you'll hear him unpack that because there is a level of inner discourse that can be helpful. And then there's a place where it becomes not so helpful. And that's really what we are mostly exploring in today's episode. Most importantly, he gives us tools to help manage the chatter in a way that can help us stay in control of it and therefore in control of ourselves. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Ethan Kross.
Well, Ethan, welcome to the Brilliant Balance Show.
Thanks for having me. Been looking forward to meeting you and having this conversation.
So fun. I absolutely loved Chatter. And I know that our listeners are going to love it too. So one thing I want to start with before we dig into the book is something that I've always been curious about is what do these people who we know only as authors or, celebrities of some sort, what does their life look like behind the scenes? So tell us a little bit about what your day was like today or what you have on the agenda.
Well, today's a pretty good day, actually. Woke up, got my high intensity interval training in early. So that was really fun. And came back, checked in with my team, got them going on a bunch of projects. How granular do you want to go here? I had a shower. It was very nice.
Good to know.
Breakfast, hung out with my wife, and then did some thinking and writing, cool. Which was great. And now I'm here. And after this,
you have kids at home.
I have kids. I have a 12 and 8-year-old, both daughters,
Awesome.
which has been a lot of fun and lots of learning, seeing them grow.
Yes.
Um, they've both challenged me professionally. It's funny, as a scientist who studies emotions and self-control, seeing how that changes with kids has been really wild and has actually generated ideas for studies. Don't tell them that.
Don't tell them, right?
Yeah. So I've got 2 kids. I'll do some more work this afternoon. Then I've got to coach soccer, make dinner, do some more work, and then go to bed.
All
So
into
pretty
bed.
busy
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, I love it though. And it's always, I appreciate your generosity in sharing that, but I think it's so telling to get a picture of, like, we get these snapshot views of people that we see publicly. Sure. It's really healthy to see that they're managing all the same things that everyone else is. And especially, just the little dynamics of, like, you're going to make dinner, you're coaching a soccer team. Our audience, a lot of working moms. And so highly relatable, right? To be juggling all those different pieces. So to really get into chatter, I want to understand, like, how should we be defining chatter? What's your working definition of it?
So chatter is the dark side of our inner voice. When we experience a problem, we often try to do something that makes a lot of sense. We use our mind to solve it. So we think about the issue. Oh my God, what am I going to do if my kid doesn't get into college? Or why did I say this to someone at work? And what often happens is we don't end up coming up with clear solutions to those problems we're struggling with. And we end up getting stuck in a negative thought loop. Mm-hmm. If it's a negative thought loop about the future or even the present, we call that worry. If it's about something that happened in the past, we call that rumination. But the idea is you're just looping over and over. You're not making progress towards solving your problem. You're catastrophizing. Yep. And that's what chatter is. And it's one of the big problems I think we face as a species.
So we're spinning, we're sort of talking about the problem with ourselves silently and not actually working towards solutions, even though we might think we are. We're more going over it and over it and over it again without it's like the hamster wheel.
Exactly. It's like that hamster wheel in your head, and you see, it's so interesting to see this. Like, I see this sometimes with my kids, and it's really, I love being able to get in there and say, hey, you realize we're just thinking about the same thing over and over again. And I just gave you an answer, but you've ignored it and you just keep on cycling. Mm-hmm. And so I think step one is just understanding what chatter is can be incredibly empowering to be able to recognize, hey, I'm doing something now that actually isn't productive.
Yes.
So what can I do about it? And that's really where the science comes into play, what I've spent my career studying, what the book is about. Yes. What are the tools that are out there to reroute those internal conversations to make them more productive? And
yes. Because first you have to know you're having them, right? I think there's a lot of people still walking around unaware that this voice in our head is omnipresent, never shuts up, and isn't always helpful. In fact, it can kind of cause quite a lot of problems. So what are some of the, like, unintended consequences or negative consequences of having this chatter? What does it affect?
Well, so it affects what I call the big three. Okay. So first, it makes it really hard for us to think and perform. I'm guessing most readers, not readers, but listeners here have had this experience. If you've ever tried reading a couple of pages in a book and you read the text, you're sure you've done it, but you get to the end and you don't remember anything that you've actually read, that's chatter, because we only have so much attention that you could focus on any given moment in time. If all your attention's on the things you're worried or ruminating about, doesn't leave anything over to do what you often need to do.
Yes.
That's one way it gets us in trouble. It can also lead to something that we call paralysis by analysis. We overthink things so much we can't get anything done. And this can be really hard in high performance context. So athletes, for example, consistently stumble because they overthink what they're trying to do. They don't just do it on autopilot. Yes. They instead get into their own heads, and then the whole performance unravels. Simone Biles in the last Olympics, this tragically happened to her. She had to drop out.
Yeah.
So that's thinking and performance. It can also undermine our relationships. And the way this works is when we're experiencing chatter, we're often highly motivated to talk about it with other people. The problem is we often find someone to talk to, and then we keep on talking about it over and over and over again. And that can have the unintentional consequence of pushing away people who genuinely care about us. But there's only so much they can do before we start to bring them down. So it's no good for relationships. And then finally, it's bad for our health. And the way this works is many people have heard that stress kills. Like this has been on all sorts of, public health announcements. Turns out that's not exactly true. The ability to experience stress in small doses is really, really helpful. It's good that I experience a little stress before a big performance, right? That alerts me to say, hey, time to prepare and focus. What makes stress toxic is when we experience a stress response, it gets activated, and it remains chronically activated over time. This is what chatter does, because something stressful happens in our lives. We don't just learn about it and leave behind. We keep on replaying it over and over and over again. And that maintains this arousal level in our bodies in ways that can be harmful. So
I think that's fascinating, because it's like we don't only have the suffering or the negative experience once, we have it over and over and over again, because our bodies we don't know the difference between the thought process and the actual experience. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So you are in essence, the chatter is making you physically ill. And there's tons of research that speaks to this.
I also think the relationships piece is really telling, and I think it'll be relatable to a lot of people listening. It certainly is to me. You think about yourself as a child, you want to process like this voice in my head. And I think I was a verbal processor from a pretty early age. You talk to your parents or you talk to a sibling or a good friend, and then we don't lose that habit. And so not only are we reliving it, but we're taking it to the people closest to us. And it's exhausting. When we don't know when to shut it down and move into solution mode.
Totally. And I think the relationships bit is one that I think is particularly tricky, because there are two sides, right? There's how do you know who to talk to about your chatter? That's one part of the equation. And then the flip side is if someone comes to you to get some help with their chatter, how should you talk to them? What should you do? Should you just listen? Should you do other things? So, and there's science that speaks to both sides of that equation. And I think it's really important and practical.
So let's take it from the side of if someone comes to us and they need help. I think we've heard so much about don't invalidate the emotion. They're having an emotional experience, to validate the emotion and not just move too quickly to problem solving. What's the right balance between those things?
So you want to do two things. And this is where social support often goes wrong, because people only do one or the other. So some people think the key to being a good advisor or coach to someone else is to just sit there and listen, let them talk, get it out, let them vent. Turns out there's been lots of research on venting. And what we know is venting can be good for strengthening the quality of relationships. So it's good to know that there are people who are willing to take the time to just listen and hear me out. But if all I do is vent in a conversation with someone else, I leave that conversation. I feel really good about the person I just spoke with, but the problem is still active in my head. I haven't done anything to reframe how I thought about it. So I continue to experience chatter. So venting alone isn't useful. The flip side is talking to someone who doesn't validate or empathize and just immediately goes into problem solving mode. That also isn't good, because those people are, to use a technical term, jerks, right? Like, you come to them, you're despondent, you're angry, and well, here's what you should do. And I've done this and it's been great for me. Like, that's not good either. Right. What you want to do is find people who can do both of those things. They first take the time to listen, hear you out, learn about your experience, validate what you're going through. And then at a certain point in the conversation, they start working with you to think differently about what's happening, to help you reframe it. Mm-hmm. That's the signature of a good chatter advisor. Now, there is an art to doing this well. And what I mean by that is, depending on the person and what they're dealing with, sometimes it takes a little bit of time before they're ready to shift from just talking and sharing to trying to reframe. Yes. And so, what I like to tell people is, if you're not sure if someone that you're talking to is ready to shift out of just sharing and venting to looking at that bigger picture, just ask them. And, I'll do this with my wife, and sometimes she'll say, no, I'm not ready. Just keep listening. Other times she'll be like, yes, please. Like, what do you think? And so that's really the blueprint for being a good chatter advisor for someone.
You ask that. Do you have a script that's really helpful, like a phrase you use that moves it?
I think I say, establish that connection. I totally get it. Sounds awful. So I validate it a little bit. And, genuinely, not inauthentically, like I genuinely care. And then I've got an idea. Can I offer it to you? I almost ask for permission
Yes.
to share. And sometimes, like I just said,
sometimes no.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not ready yet. And that's something that we've learned from lots of research, right? Depending on the more intense the experience is, the more time people need to spend just sharing before they're ready to start processing it.
Because truthfully, without that receptivity or readiness, you're not going to get anywhere. And then the person who's sort of trying to offer the advice is frustrated, or the guidance or the idea, because they're not ready. And now they feel like you're fixing them, and it all kind of collapses on itself. So that simple technique of adding like a readiness check before you move there is probably helpful if you're more stereotypically the fixer, right, in any given relationship.
Yeah. And, absolutely. And I think just having this very simple blueprint that, hey, here are the two things that I can do to really help someone is really useful, because we've done studies. We've asked people, hey, what do you think is the best way to help someone through their chatter? A lot of people will respond, I think the best thing to do is just sit there and listen. Like lots of people
think that
they want to be helpful, but they have no idea how to do it. And the answer is pretty simple. It's straightforward, but people need to know what it is. And so that's why I like sharing.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. I love it. So the other thing, if we don't have someone else to help us manage our chatter or sort of regulate, is we may be trying to do this on our own. And I think that's where a lot of us get into trouble with rumination and perseveration, all the things you were mentioning at the beginning. So you have a toolkit that you unpack in the book, and I would love you to share a few of those with the listeners today.
Yeah, happy to. So, first, like some disclaimers and some things I feel very strongly about. There's no single tool that works for all people across all situations. That's not something to get discouraged by. I think you should be excited about that. It would be crazy to think, given how unique we all are, that we all do one thing and it magically makes our chatter go away, right? Instead, what we've learned is that there are dozens of things you can do, and different combinations of tools work for different people. So what can you do? Here are a couple of my favorites. I'll just rapid fire them off.
Okay.
So one thing we know is that when you're struggling, being able to take a step back and thinking about your experience more objectively, like you would almost think about another person's struggles, can be really helpful. We are much better as a species at giving advice to other people than we are giving advice and following it ourselves.
Yes.
When I give presentations on this, I will ask like thousands of people, have you ever been in a situation where a friend or a loved one has come to you with a problem? They've experiencing chatter they don't know what to do. They present the problem to you, and it's easy for you to coach them through it. Inevitably, every hand in the audience goes up. And I think it really is a truism. Here's what's really cool. We have developed, we've evolved to possess tools that allow us to step outside ourselves, to think about ourselves like we're thinking about someone else. And often it's really easy to do. One tool that's probably my first line of defense if I am experiencing a little chatter is something we call distant self-talk. Use your name to try to work through a problem. All right, Ethan, how are you going to manage this? Here's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
When do we use names? When do we use words like you? When we think about and refer to other people.
Sure.
So you use your own name to think about your problems. It alters your perspective, makes it much easier for you to give yourself advice.
It's like you sort of move outside of yourself and you're giving advice from like your own guardian angel or like the voice on your shoulder. Yeah, that perspective shift. And the simple use of just your own name to do it is phenomenal. Yeah.
And we've done like neuroscience studies. This switches people's perspectives in a matter of seconds because of the way language works. And so that's one thing you could do. Disclaimer here is you don't want to do this like out loud while walking down the streets of a city. You want to do it silently in your head or out loud in the confines of your own home.
What about journaling it to yourself, like typing it to yourself?
Journaling is another tool I talk about. When you're writing about yourself, you become the character in a story. So that's another way of giving ourselves some distance. That can be helpful. Another tool that I love is something that we call mental time travel. When you're stuck experiencing chatter, we zoom in on the problem. it often feels like we can't think about anything else. And we lose sight of the fact that most experiences that we worry and ruminate in our lives, they eventually fade, right? We move on to other things, sometimes other sources of chatter. But if you think about most emotional difficulties you've encountered, they've spiked and then declined. And reminding yourself of that in the moment can be really powerful, because what it does is it gives you hope that you're going to feel better. And so here's an easy way to do that. Ask yourself how you're going to feel about this thing tomorrow morning, or a week from now, or a month from now, or 10 years from now. That highlights the impermanence of what we're going through in ways that can be really helpful.
Yes.
So those are a couple of distancing tools. We know the outdoors can be really helpful. Increasing your exposure to green spaces can be very helpful for restoring your attention to help you manage your chatter. I see your window. You've got some nice trees there. That's really good.
Yes.
Creating order around you. That was one that wasn't on my radar. That has been really interesting.
And this is so on my radar because I think since I was little, this is a self-soothing approach. So talk a little bit how order in your environment can calm the voice in your head.
So, you and I as children were very different, I think. I was also verbal as a child, but I remember the only arguments, I think, like big arguments I had with my mom growing up was why I had to actually keep my room clean. I conveyed to her, I knew where everything was on the floor. So no one's coming in.
What is the point?
Why does it matter? I lost that battle. But here's how this works. So traditionally, like my office does have stacks of papers and books, and my wife is forever on my case because there's a trail of clothing from the shower to the closet. She doesn't like that very much.
Uh-huh.
When I have some chat, you're suppressing the dissatisfaction right now. I can tell the judgment. When I'm experiencing chatter, I put everything away. I do it in my office, and I go up to the bedroom. I clean up my stuff. I organize my kids' rooms. I clean up the kitchen. And it wasn't until I dove into this research that I understood why I was doing it. So when you're experiencing chatter, it feels like you don't have control. Your thoughts are taken over. And we don't like that. Human beings, we crave control.
Right.
That makes the world more predictable, and we like predictable things. What we've learned is you can compensate for not feeling in control of your thoughts and feelings by exerting control around you. And tidying up and organizing is a way to do that. Yeah. And so I'll proactively do that nowadays. Like if I know something stressful is coming up, if I'm not quite getting to where I want to be on a manuscript and a deadline is approaching, I'll just, I'll do the dishes.
Create some order.
Order.
I totally agree with the idea of agency that, it's what can I control if something is feeling out of control. I also think it's removing sensory stimulus. So there's, if you're sort of visually assaulted by clutter, getting a sense of order or taking things out of the space around you, I think is like calming to your central nervous system. So for me, I think it works on two levels.
Well, and there's absolutely data to support that. There's this one study that showed that when people are stressed out, they actually, if you present them with different kinds of images, one that has a little square around it's nice, neat, and organized, another that's a little bit more abstract, you prefer the neat and organized image. And so, there's something.
My husband knows when things are bad when I start removing the labels from branded products so as not to have to deal with that. Like I was taking the label off the toothpaste. He's like, maybe we're going a little far here.
Yes, that's
maybe a little far.
And well, let's stay on that beat for a second, right? Because, sometimes people will ask, well, but wait a second, ordering your spaces, like, isn't that something associated with certain types of anxiety disorders like obsessive compulsive disorder and other things? I also talk in the book about the benefits of rituals. Rituals can be really useful for managing chatter. But all of these tools, order, distancing, rituals, if taken to an extreme, they can, of course, be problematic. That is true, I would argue, though, of any tool we have in our toolbox, right? And if you think about like a physical tool, like a hammer does great things, I hear, among people who know how to use it, right? You can build homes and fix things, but in the wrong hands, it could be a source of destruction.
Right.
So same is true about all of these tools. You want to use them in the right dosages.
Mhm. And these are modulation tools. So everything really is about finding the center, right? You're describing
Absolutely.
chatter as I'm agitated. I don't know how to quiet this down. I have this overactive brain. And by the way, in a negative loop, right? The sort of definition of chatter is the dark side of this.
Yeah.
So we're looking to bring that back to a manageable level, and it's internally defined, right? Which is what I loved about your book is the only person who can decide is it well managed is you based on the experience you're having. So knowing that you're having it, that there is this constant dialogue, being able to assess, is it positive? Is it helping me? Or is it negative, right? Am I stuck somewhere? And then if I'm stuck, that's when I want tools to move out of it. So the list is extensive in the book, and I would encourage everybody to go read it. We're going to link it up, but I want you to talk, if you will, about the mind-body connection and reinterpreting your body's response to the chatter, because I think this is the part we might ignore, and we're trying to think our way out of the situation, and there might be a way to use our body here.
Oh yeah, I love this tool. And for any listeners who have kids, this is one tool that's worked really well with my children when they've dealt with a little bit of chatter before performances or big tests and things like that. So when you drop a person in a objectively stressful situation, we automatically ask ourselves two kinds of questions: what's required of me? And do I have the resources to manage this situation? If you ask yourself those questions, right, and you say, nope, can't handle it, that elicits what we call threat response. This predicts poor performance, poor subjective response. You feel bad, and poor physiological outcomes. You tense up, you get spikes in physiological reactivity that can be damaging. If, on the other hand, you ask yourself these two questions: what's required of me and can I manage it? And you say, yeah, I can do this. That elicits a challenge response. And that predicts the opposite profile for results: better performance, better subjective feelings, better physiological responding. Here's how that idea plays out when it comes to your body and bodily symptoms of arousal and stress. As many of us know, when we're in a stressful situation, our body starts doing all sorts of funky things. It makes sounds, right? Sometimes when we don't want sounds to be made, your stomach gurgles, palms start to sweat. Maybe you feel knots in your stomach, tightness in your chest.
Get red.
You get red. Many people reflexively interpret those bodily symptoms as a sign of threat. Oh no, I can't do this. My body's saying I can't do this. And that stresses people out further, creating this vicious cycle. Research shows, though, that a very small shift in how you interpret those bodily signals can make a huge difference. So rather than thinking about the stomach pains and sweaty palms as a sign that you can't do it, instead you think to yourself, my body is doing exactly what it should be doing to prepare me for this situation. I'm like a Lamborghini, right? It's revving me up for this situation, preparing me to manage it effectively. And when you do that, when you reframe how you interpret your bodily symptoms of stress, that can be a really good thing. So I do this with my kids. They took up diving last summer, which actually I didn't realize it when they started, is a really chatter-provoking sport potential, right?
I think so, yeah.
Because everyone's staring at you. You've got a long time to wait before you go on the diving board. So there's lots of time to get in your head to feel those, butterflies in your stomach and so forth. And this stuff worked like a charm. So I would highly encourage trying it yourself and trying it with your kids.
I love it. We had a similar conversation in a coaching call with my group about a ballet recital, like a dance recital coming up in that, can you talk to her about this? These feelings are really twins. They sit really close to each other in your body, but that prepping for peak performance. And this is a challenge and my body's like gearing up for it is such a positive frame. But boy, it takes practice to talk yourself through this, right? So chatter is a lifelong, it's with us. It's going to ride sidecar. What I love about your book is you're not suggesting that we eliminate it or that it's even possible to. It's really, how do we make peace with it? Maybe get in dialogue with it. So what would you leave people with today as the right sort of frame to be in as it relates to their chatter?
Well, I think number one, if you experience chatter, welcome to the human condition. Most people do, at least the ones that I've met, over the past 20 years. Nothing wrong with you as long as it's not extreme. For most of us, chatter is just a part of life. And what really fills me with hope and excitement is just knowing that there are lots of things that we can do. Science-based tools, everything. I am a scientist. Everything I talk about is science-based. I think that's really important because there are a lot of myths out there about how to manage your chatter that can do harm. There are lots of things we could do to manage this chatter effectively and really convert our inner voice into an ally rather than a vulnerability. And I would love for listeners to try out the tools and see how they work for them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Best place to find you online so that we link to the right place in the show notes.
www.ethankross.com. And there are links to the book, our lab, other social media sites, and things like that.
Perfect. We will have everyone do that. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been fantastic. I loved the book, and I know that a lot of people listening will as well.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you are new to the Brilliant Balance podcast and you want to get better connected, head over to brilliant-balance.com/weekly and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. It is a digital delivery to your inbox every Tuesday morning with a roundup of all the activities that are happening in the Brilliant Balance world. You can also join the Brilliant Balance Facebook group by going to Facebook, searching groups for Brilliant Balance, and we will welcome you into that community. And you can take a look at the podcast archives on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Search for keywords that might be relevant to you and the problems you're trying to solve, and see what we have for you in our archives of episodes. Again, thanks for tuning in today. Until next time, my friends, let's be brilliant.